issues.
All right, usually we hit the political big three at this point in the show, but let's be honest, there's only one giant political story today, Brett Kavanaugh and that historic Supreme Court vote. Just moments ago, the Senate voted 51 to 49 to advance to a final confirmation vote. But Senators Susan Collins and Jeff Flake, both Republicans, have left us with two giant question marks. Could they flip tomorrow when they take a vote, right? Could they end up voting no? Let's talk about this and about the vote and the ramifications and what it's done to our country. Attorney and former D.C. Democratic Party Chair A. Scott Bolden is with me, and former U.S. Attorney Michael Moore is with me as well.
Good morning.
Michael, good morning. Michael, I think Republicans successfully turned this into a due process argument. Is that what it is?
You know, it's really not a due process argument. It's been described a little bit as a job interview, and I think that's probably a more accurate description. Remember that Brett Kavanaugh has no right to sit on the Supreme Court. This is an effort to go through and to investigate, to determine either through the hearings, through questions, through statements that were made, obviously through background investigations, whether or not Brett Kavanaugh is a fit to serve on the highest court in the land. So it's not a question of depriving him of something, it's more a question of making sure that the integrity of the court and the public confidence in the court is maintained. So I think it's probably more fair to talk about it being a full job interview for promotion. But
that's no longer what it is, Scott. It's actually bigger now than a Senate confirmation on a U.S. Supreme Court justice. It's pitted men against women. Mm-hmm. It's turned sexual assault into a political football. I never thought I'd live to see the day that happened.
Well, it certainly is still an interview, but the substance of the interview and the individual and his background and his temperament and whether he lied or was misleading regarding his over drinking have become real subjects of this interview. So I don't think the process has changed. How the GOP has driven the narrative, how Judge Kavanaugh has driven the narrative, and how they've handled it have had the Me Too movement and men and women who are outraged that getting to the truth of his character is not been a priority for the GOP-run Senate. But secondly, and more importantly, 1,200 professors, a former Supreme Court justice, have all said that his affirmative partisan presentation and disrespectful presentation means he doesn't have the temperament, and not getting to the truth of his drinking, which could be the bridge to whether this sexual attack occurred or did not occur. It just makes the GOP look like they're interested in filling the Supreme Court seat at all costs and not getting at the truth. Mm-hmm. And their risk is that they're going to hear from the Me Too movement come November 6th midterms.
So Brett Kavanaugh, he wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, Michael, and he talked about exactly that, how he does have the judicial temperament, and that when he was testifying that second time under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee, it was full of emotion because he's a man falsely accused, but that's not really him. Should we take him at his word?
I think that probably his actions spoke louder, and I want to be careful in case I end up arguing there at the court. But, you know, it was unseemly. Right. The process has been unseemly. The entire thing where we've had a Supreme Court nominee give a Fox News interview, we've got him now writing op-ed pieces, we've got people riding around the country in buses saying, I support Brett, and we've got TV ads running out talking about that. That's not what the Supreme Court is. The court is made up of people, and they're from different political parties, admittedly, but they become nonpartisan. It's a place where the public can have confidence in decisions that come out there. Even if you don't agree with the politics of everybody that sits there, you have to have that. What we saw was a blustering, angry, partisan rant. And the concern is that bleeds over into decisions in cases that may come before the court, should he be sitting there. So, I think it's a little late to come back at the end of the day and say, by the way, on the eve of my confirmation vote, I want to, put an op-ed piece out that tells, what kind of person I am. The chance to do that was in the hearing. And in that second hearing, when he had the full country watching it, he could have said, look,
Here's the danger to what you're saying, the practical. Like, let's say he has to decide a case on gerrymandering, right?
Right,
And now
right.
we know how he feels about, there's a Clinton conspiracy out there, and Democrats are against his nomination because, maybe he leans Republican. I don't know. But
Right.
might the lawyers arguing before the Supreme Court ask him to recuse himself from a case like that because of how he testified under oath?
I think likely not. They really won't get anywhere if they do. But how about decisions on who controls a woman's body when we've had these kind of allegations out there? So it poses problems for the court. John Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, has talked a lot about the image of the court and maintaining the court's independence and sort of the reverence that the Supreme Court has. That's in play now. That's in question now. And it's something. There are wounds that will take decades and decades to heal.
Yeah. And Judge Kavanaugh put all of that in play. Listen, the line of demarcation for Judge Kavanaugh vis-a-vis his last-minute New York op-ed piece is to look at this. This is how you decipher what's real about Kavanaugh or not. His first statement to the his first presentation, he read it, and he talked about what type of jurist he would be. His second presentation was about who he was. And by the way, his second presentation that was offensive and a partisan rant, he wrote it himself, didn't share it with anybody, and he did this gratuitously. Now the third presentation is, he tells you that, well, I did that. He didn't even apologize for it, said he said some things wrong, and then again he talked about what type of jurist he would be. If someone tells you and shows you who they are, you got to believe them, and there's only one presentation that showed us who he was, and that was the rant last week we heard from Kavanaugh, and that's why he did that New York op-ed piece, because a former Supreme Court justice, 1,200 law professors and others said, this is not someone that we want on the Supreme Court. This is bothersome, regardless of what happens in regard to something, the alleged sexual assault 36 years ago. These are real problems, and I agree with my colleague. This could have some long-standing issues. I do think they're going to have recusal issues on Democratic organizations or Democratic positions that come before him based on his own words and what we saw. This is going to have long-lasting effect, and recusal will always be on the table, but I doubt they'll get very far.
Okay, so just a minor correction. The op-ed appeared in the Wall Street Journal, not the New York Times, and just in case people want to read it.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
That's okay. That's okay.
Let me say this in just a little bit of a different tack on it from this side. I think the Republicans have done Brett Kavanaugh a huge disservice by doing this sort of quick and fast and loose background check or supplemental check. If, in fact, the allegations are not true, if, in fact, this thing has been blown up, if, in fact, the stories about passing out and other things are not true and exposing himself and sexual assault, then he deserves to be able to serve the remainder of his judicial career with honor and without having a cloud hanging over his head. So this whole thing, this entire process has not only hurt the confidence in the court, but it's also, I think, been a disservice to him, and I think he deserves that. I've been through a background check, and it took months and months. And so the idea that we've got to do something in 4 days is silly. I mean, it's just an artificial deadline and timeline that got put on there for no reason. And the FBI is thorough, and they can be thorough, and we didn't take advantage of that. So it's really been a disservice to the country and to him.
I have to end the conversation here. I have to end the conversation here. I apologize. I wish I could go on, but we will see what happens tomorrow when the full Senate votes for Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation.